You're barren. No man will want you. Those words followed Clara Whitlock across 3 states and 1,000 miles of dust. But when she stepped off that stage into the brutal Montana wilderness, the man waiting for her didn't ask about her womb. He asked if she could survive winter. Elias Boone didn't need her to be perfect. He needed her to be unbreakable. And what happened next, between blizzards, betrayal, and a ghost from her past who came to destroy everything, proved that some women aren't made for drawing rooms. They're forged in fire. Stay with me until the end, hit like, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Clara Whitlock against the wooden frame hard enough to rattle her teeth. Dust exploded through the cracked windows, coating her already filthy traveling dress in another layer of frontier grit. She pressed a gloved hand to the glass and peered out at what the driver had called Last Hope Station, though it looked more like the place Hope went to die. 3 crooked buildings, a well that might have been dry, and standing in the center of it all, a man built like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. Clara's stomach twisted. She'd traveled over 1,000 miles to meet a stranger, a man whose letter had been blunt to the point of brutality. I need a wife. Not for love, not for show, for work. If you can't handle that, don't come. No poetry, no promises, just cold honesty. It was exactly what she'd needed. Because back in Philadelphia, honesty had looked different. It had looked like her fiancé, Victor Hale, sitting across from her in his family's marble parlor, his voice low and devastated as he explained why their engagement had to end. Clara, you know I care for you, but my family, they expect heirs, and the doctors confirmed. I know what they confirmed. Then you understand. I can't marry a woman who can't give me children. It's not personal. Not personal. As if being declared defective, broken, less than wasn't the most personal thing in the world. She'd left Philadelphia 3 days later. No tears, no dramatics. Just a single bag and a response to an advertisement she'd found tucked in the back of a women's magazine. Seeking capable woman for partnership on Montana homestead. No frills. No romance. Honest work only. She'd written back that same night. Now stepping down from the coach onto frozen ground, Clara forced herself to breathe. The cold bit through her coat immediately, sharper than any winter she'd known back east. The air smelled like pine and snow and something wild she couldn't name. The man didn't move, just watched her with eyes the color of storm clouds, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Clara lifted her chin and walked toward him, her boots crunching over ice. He was taller than she'd expected, broader. His coat was worn but well kept, his hands scarred and strong. There was no softness in him, not in his posture, not in his face, but there was something steady, something that didn't flinch. Miss Whitlock, he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. Mr. Boone. They stood there, 2 strangers measuring each other in the fading light. Finally, he nodded toward the smallest building, a cabin that looked like it had been built by someone who'd never heard of comfort. That's home. It's not much. I didn't come for much. His eyes flickered, surprise maybe, or approval. Hard to tell. He picked up her bag without asking and started walking. Clara followed, her heart pounding harder than it should have been. Inside the cabin was exactly what she'd expected. Rough-hewn logs, a stone fireplace, a single table with 2 chairs. A bed in the corner that made her cheeks burn despite herself. Everything was clean, though, sparse, but cared for. Elias set her bag down and turned to face her, his expression still unreadable. I'll be plain with you, he said. I don't need someone to decorate this place or smile pretty at neighbors. I need someone who can work, cook, mend, help me keep this land through the winter. In return, you get a roof, food, and your name on the deed when we make it legal. Legal, Clara repeated. Marriage. In name, at least. He paused, then added, what happens beyond that is up to both of us. But I won't force anything. Relief and something else, something she didn't want to name, flooded through her. I can work, she said quietly. I'm not afraid of that. Good. He moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Yes? I don't care what brought you here. Whatever happened back east, whatever people said about you, it doesn't matter. Out here, the only thing that counts is what you do, not what you were. Clara's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Elias left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. Clara stood alone in the cabin, surrounded by silence and the faint smell of wood smoke. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was suffocating. Though the first week nearly broke her, Clara had thought herself capable. She'd run her family's household after her mother died, managed staff, planned dinners for 20. But this was different. The fire went out twice on the first night because she didn't know how to bank it properly. She burned breakfast so badly the smell clung to the cabin for days. Her hands, unused to rough work, blistered and bled within hours of trying to help Elias mend a fence. He didn't yell, didn't mock, just showed her again, slower, his big hands moving with surprising gentleness. "Like this," he said, guiding her grip on the axe. "Let the weight do the work. You're fighting it." She tried again. The log split clean. "Better," he said, and walked away. It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't criticism either, just acknowledgement. Clara clung to that. By the second week, she could start a fire without help. By the third, her biscuits were almost edible. Elias ate them without comment, which she took as a minor victory. They didn't talk much. Elias wasn't a man who filled silence with words. But Clara began to notice things, small kindnesses that might have looked like nothing to someone else. The way he always made sure the woodpile by the door was stacked high before a storm. How he left warm water in the basin every morning so she wouldn't have to break ice. The way he never asked about her past, never pressed when she went quiet. One evening, after a long day of hauling water and scrubbing clothes until her arms ached, Clara sat by the fire and finally let herself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears that she couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't hear Elias come in. "You hurt?" His voice was quiet, careful. "No." She wiped her face quickly. "Just tired." He sat down across from her, the fire crackling between them. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, "You're doing better than you think." Clara looked up, startled. "I've seen strong men quit this life inside a month," he continued, his gaze steady on the flames. "You haven't quit. That counts for something." "I'm not strong," Clara said quietly. "I'm just out of other options. Strength's not about having options. It's about what you do when you don't." She studied him in the firelight, this strange, quiet man who'd offered her a life without promises, who asked for nothing but effort, who treated her like she was capable even when she felt like she was drowning. "Why did you really send for a wife?" she asked suddenly. "You could manage alone. You have been." Elias was quiet for a long time. Then, "Winter's hard out here. Harder when you're alone. I wanted—" He paused, searching for words. Someone to share the load, someone to build something with. "Not love? Love's a luxury. Partnership's a necessity." He looked at her then, his storm gray eyes unguarded for the first time. "But that doesn't mean it can't become something more. If both people are willing." Clara's breath caught. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she could trust the warmth blooming in her chest. But she nodded, and that seemed to be enough. "What?" The storm hit in late November, 3 weeks after Clara's arrival. She woke to a howling that sounded like the world was tearing itself apart. Snow battered the cabin walls, and the temperature inside had dropped so low she could see her breath in thick clouds. Elias was already up, banking the fire, his movements efficient despite the early hour. "Stay inside," he said without looking at her. "I need to check the animals." "I can help. Not in this. If you get turned around out there, you'll freeze before I find you." He was out the door before she could argue, swallowed by a wall of white. Clara paced the cabin, anxiety clawing at her. She fed the fire, made coffee, waited. An hour passed, then 2. She was reaching for her coat, terror overriding sense, when the door burst open. Elias stumbled in, covered in snow, his face raw from the cold. "The fence is down," he said, breathing hard. "Cattle scattered. I got most of them into the shelter, but—" He swayed. Clara caught him, her hands gripping his arms. "You're freezing. Sit down." "Can't. Need to—" "Sit. Down." Something in her voice made him listen. He sank into the chair and Clara moved fast, pulling off his frozen gloves, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders, pressing a hot cup into his hands. Drink. He obeyed, watching her with something like surprise. The cattle can wait, Clara said firmly. You can't help them if you're dead. They'll die and you'll die if you go back out there like this. So we wait until the storm breaks, and then we go together. Elias stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. They sat together through the storm, feeding the fire, rationing supplies, listening to the wind scream. Clara had never been so cold in her life, but she also felt something else, something fierce and protective, and entirely unexpected. When the storm finally broke 2 days later, they went out together. The damage was bad. Fence destroyed, 3 cattle lost. But they worked side by side, rebuilding what the storm had torn apart. Clara's hands were numb, her muscles screaming, but she didn't stop. And when Elias looked at her across the remains of the fence, something shifted in his expression. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I did. Clara met his eyes. This is my home too. He nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. That night, after they'd collapsed by the fire, too exhausted to even eat, Elias spoke again. I was wrong, he said. About what? When I said I needed someone to work. I needed more than that. I just didn't know it yet. Clara's chest tightened. What do you need? Someone who won't run when it gets hard. Someone who'll fight for this place the way I do. He paused. Someone like you. She didn't know what to say, so she just reached out and took his hand. He held on tight. Buns? December brought a cautious peace. The days were brutal, chopping wood, hauling water, caring for animals that seemed determined to die of stubbornness. But the nights were different. After dinner, they'd sit by the fire and Elias would talk. Not much, but more than before. He told her about growing up in the mountains, about losing his family to sickness, about claiming this land with nothing but determination and a rifle. His voice was low, rough, but there was something in it, something that made Clara feel like she was being trusted with something precious. She told him pieces of her own story. Not everything, not Victor, but enough that he understood why she'd left. They made you feel broken, Elias said one night, his voice hard. I am broken. The doctors confirmed. The doctors don't know everything. Elias, you're not broken, Clara. You're here. You're alive. You're fighting. That's not broken. That's strength. She wanted to believe him. Almost did. One evening, as they sat together mending clothes, Elias reached over and took her hand. His thumb brushed over her scarred knuckles, evidence of hard work, of survival. These are good hands, he said quietly. Clara's breath hitched. They're not refined anymore. Refined doesn't matter out here. Strong does. Capable does. He looked up at her. You matter, Clara. Not what you can or can't do. You. Something broke open inside her chest. Something she'd been holding closed since Victor had walked away. I don't know if I can give you children, she whispered. I don't know if I can give you a family. Then we'll build one anyway, however it looks, however it comes. His grip tightened. I don't need perfect. I need you. Clara kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. She just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, tasting coffee and smoke and something that felt like home. Elias went still for a heartbeat. Then he kissed her back, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that made her want to cry. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I know I said this was just partnership, he murmured, but that was before I knew you. Before I watched you face down a blizzard and rebuild a fence and refuse to quit even when everything was hard. What is it now? Clara asked, her voice shaking. Everything. None. Christmas came quietly. Clara made a small feast from their limited supplies, roasted venison, biscuits that were actually good, dried apple pie that Elias ate 3 pieces of. He'd carved her a small wooden box, simple but beautiful, the kind of thing that took hours of quiet work. For your things, he said, almost shy, so you have something that's yours. Clara traced the smooth wood, her throat tight. Thank you. That night, wrapped in blankets by the fire, Elias pulled her close. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The wind howled outside, but inside, Clara felt warm for the first time in years. She thought about Victor, about Philadelphia, about the woman she'd been, fragile, uncertain, desperate to be chosen. She wasn't that woman anymore. She'd become someone who could split wood and birth calves and stand in a blizzard without breaking. Someone who didn't need to be chosen because she'd chosen herself. And Elias, this quiet, steady man who'd offered her partnership and given her so much more, he'd chosen her too. Not despite her flaws, not in ignorance of them, but with full knowledge of who she was. "I love you," Clara whispered into the darkness. Elias's arms tightened around her. "I love you too." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, while the Montana winter raged outside and the fire burned low. January brought hope. Clara woke one morning feeling strange, a subtle shift in her body that she couldn't quite name. She ignored it, throwing herself into the day's work. But the feeling persisted. A tenderness. A fatigue that wasn't quite normal. She didn't say anything, didn't dare hope. But 2 weeks later, when the sickness hit, she couldn't deny it anymore. Elias found her bent over the basin, retching, her whole body shaking. "Clara." "I'm fine," she gasped. "Just something I ate." But his face had gone very still. "How long?" "What? How long have you been sick in the mornings?" She stared at him, her heart pounding. "A week. Maybe more." Elias knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her back. "Could you be—" "No." The word came out sharp, defensive. "The doctor said—" "Doctors have been wrong before." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But she'd lived with the certainty of her barrenness for so long that hope felt dangerous. I can't let myself think it's possible," she whispered. "If I'm wrong, then we'll face that together." Elias cupped her face, his eyes steady and sure. "But what if you're right? What if this is real?" Clara closed her eyes, letting herself imagine it for just a moment. A child. Their child. Something she'd been told was impossible. "We'll wait," Elias said quietly. "We'll see. But whatever happens, Clara, you're enough, with or without this. You hear me?" She nodded, tears spilling over. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of terror and joy. Clara's body changed in small ways, subtle enough that she could almost convince herself she was imagining it. But Elias watched her with a quiet protectiveness that made her heart ache. He took over the heavier chores without asking, made sure she ate even when she felt too sick, held her on the nights when fear kept her awake. "What if I lose it?" she whispered one night. "What if my body can't? Then we'll grieve, and we'll keep going. But don't borrow tomorrow's pain, Clara. Be here, now, with me." She pressed her face into his chest and tried to believe him. By late February, there was no denying it. Her body was changing in ways that couldn't be explained away. A small swell to her abdomen, a flutter she felt one morning that made her gasp. "Elias!" He was at her side instantly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I felt something, like movement." His hand went to her stomach, his palm warmed through her dress. They stood frozen, barely breathing. Then it came again. A tiny flutter. Undeniable. Elias's eyes went bright. "That's our baby," Clara finished, her voice breaking. "That's our baby." He kissed her then, deep and fierce, his hand still pressed to the life growing inside her. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Clara let herself believe in miracles. March brought the first whisper of spring and the first shadow of trouble. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching. Something about the way he sat his horse, the cut of his clothes, made her blood run cold. She knew that silhouette. Victor Hale. He reined in at the edge of the property, his eyes sweeping over the humble cabin, the rough land, before landing on Clara with something like pity. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "I've been searching for you." She stood frozen, clothespins forgotten in her hand. Elias appeared from the barn, his rifle held loose but ready. "You're on private property." Victor's smile didn't waver. "Elias Boone, I presume." "I'm Victor Hale." Clara's former fiancé. Former being the important word. Elias's voice was flat, dangerous. Indeed. Victor dismounted, moving with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. I came to speak with Clara, privately, if possible. Not happening, Elias said. It's all right, Clara said quietly, finding her voice. She moved to Elias's side, her hand finding his. Whatever he has to say, he can say it in front of both of us. Victor's eyes dropped to their joined hands, then to the small swell of Clara's stomach. His expression flickered. Surprise, then something harder. You're pregnant, he said flatly. Yes. The doctors were wrong. Clara lifted her chin. Now say what you came to say and leave. Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed, his expression shifting to something that might have looked like concern if she didn't know him better. Clara, I made a mistake. Letting you go was the worst decision of my life. I've come to bring you home. This is my home. This? Victor gestured dismissively at the cabin, the land. Living in poverty, working yourself to death, married to a man who can barely provide. Careful, Elias said, his voice dropping. I can give you everything, Victor continued, his eyes locked on Clara. The life you were meant for. Medical care for the baby. Safety. Comfort. Everything this place can't offer. I don't want it, Clara said clearly. I don't want you. I never did. I just didn't know it until I found something real. Victor's mask slipped. Just for a moment, she saw the anger beneath. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was ever believing you loved me. This isn't over, Victor said quietly. His eyes shifted to Elias. You should know, I've filed a challenge to your land claim. Seems there's some question about the original survey. If I'm right, this land doesn't belong to you, and neither does she. Clara felt Elias go rigid beside her. Get off my property, Elias said, his voice deadly calm. Victor smiled. Our property. At least it will be. See you in court, Boone. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Clara and Elias standing in the cold spring wind. He can't do this, Clara whispered. Can he? Elias's jaw was tight. If he's got lawyers and money, he can try. Land claims out here are messy. If he can prove a surveying error or bribe the right people, we'll lose everything. Not without a fight. Elias turned to her, his hands gripping her shoulders. Whatever happens, Clara, we're in this together. You understand? I'm not letting him take you. I'm not letting him take our home. Clara nodded, fear and fury warring inside her. The battle for their life had just begun. What? End of part 1. The weeks following Victor's arrival moved with the slow, grinding weight of a landslide. Clara watched Elias ride into town 3 times to meet with the land office, each time returning with a face more carved from stone than before. The legal challenge was real. Victor had money, connections, and a surveyor willing to swear that Elias's original claim had been filed with incorrect boundary markers. It's a lie, Elias said one night, his hands curled into fists on the table. I walked every inch of this land with the original surveyor. The markers are exactly where they should be. Then why is the office even considering it? Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. Because Victor Hale has deep pockets, and out here, money talks louder than truth sometimes. Clara felt the baby move inside her, a small flutter that reminded her exactly what was at stake. This wasn't just land anymore. It was their future, their child's future, everything they'd built together. What do we do? She asked quietly. Elias looked at her, his storm-gray eyes tired but unbroken. We fight. We find every document, every witness, every piece of proof that this land is ours, and we don't give him an inch. That night, Clara barely slept. She lay beside Elias, listening to his steady breathing, her mind racing through possibilities and fears. Victor wasn't just attacking their land claim. He was attacking everything, their marriage, their legitimacy, their right to exist in this place they'd carved out of wilderness. When dawn came, she rose before Elias and started breakfast, her movements mechanical. The cabin that had felt like home now felt fragile, temporary, like something that could be taken away with the stroke of a pen. Elias found her standing at the window, watching the sun rise over land that might not be theirs much longer. "We're not losing this," he said from behind her. "I don't care what it takes." Clara turned to face him. "Victor won't stop. You know that. This is about me, not the land. He wants to prove I made a mistake choosing you." "Did you?" The question hung between them, raw and vulnerable. "No," Clara said fiercely. "Never. But he's going to try to destroy us anyway." "Then we'd better be ready." The next morning, Elias rode out before dawn. Clara spent the day working through her fear, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw, mending clothes with stitches so tight they'd never come undone, baking bread that she barely tasted. The baby moved constantly now, as if sensing her distress. When Elias returned that evening, he wasn't alone. Clara heard the horses before she saw them. She stepped outside to find Elias dismounting alongside two men she recognized from town, Samuel Carter, who ran the general store, and Thomas Webb, an older homesteader whose land bordered theirs to the east. "Mrs. Boone," Samuel said, tipping his hat. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Not at all," Clara said, though confusion must have shown on her face. Thomas stepped forward, his weathered face serious. "We heard about Hale's challenge. Wanted you to know you're not alone in this." "We've seen this before," Samuel added. "Rich man from back east comes in, thinks he can buy or steal what he wants. Usually works, because most folks don't have the spine to fight back. But Elias here, he's different, and from what we've seen, so are you, ma'am." Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. "Thank you, but I don't understand what you can do." "Witnesses," Elias said quietly. "Samuel was here when I filed the original claim. Thomas helped me set the northern boundary markers. They're willing to testify." "More than willing," Thomas said gruffly. "Your husband helped me pull my cattle out of a flash flood last spring. Lost my barn to fire the year before, and Elias was the first one there with timber and labor. We don't forget that kind of thing out here." Clara's throat tightened. She'd been so focused on survival, on just getting through each day, that she hadn't realized Elias had built something more than a homestead. He'd built community, trust, the kind of bonds that mattered when everything else fell apart. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Don't need to say anything," Samuel replied. "Just don't give up. That's all we ask." After they left, Clara turned to Elias. "You never told me you helped them. Wasn't worth mentioning. It's just what you do out here. You help your neighbors because someday you'll need help too." "It's more than that," Clara said softly. "They respect you. They're willing to risk going up against someone like Victor for you." "For us," Elias corrected. He pulled her close, his hand resting on her growing belly. "They see what we're building here. They want it to survive, same as we do." That night, Clara felt hope kindle again. Small, fragile, but real. But Victor wasn't finished. 3 days later, a man arrived from the land office with a formal notice. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out, in the county seat 30 miles away. Clara read the document twice, her hands shaking. "They're questioning the marriage too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias took the paper, his jaw tightening as he read. "They're claiming it's fraudulent, that you married me to circumvent your family's objections, and that the land claim is therefore invalid because spousal rights don't apply. That's insane. We were legally married by a circuit preacher who's been dead 6 months." Elias's voice was flat. "Convenient, isn't it? Can't exactly get him to testify." Clara felt the room spin. "Victor found out. Victor made sure of it. Probably paid someone to dig through records until they found something they could twist." Elias set the paper down carefully, like it might explode. "He's not just trying to take the land. He's trying to erase our entire life here. What do we do? We find proof the marriage was legitimate. The preacher's records, witnesses to the ceremony, anything that shows this was real. And if we can't?" Elias looked at her, his eyes fierce. "Then we get married again, in front of every witness we can find, and we dare them to call it fraudulent." The next week blurred into a frenzy of preparation. Elias rode to the small church where they'd been married, returning with the registry book that thankfully still existed. Clara wrote to the 2 witnesses who'd been present, a farming couple who'd happened to be there that day. Samuel and Thomas spread word through the homesteading community, gathering statements and support. But Clara could feel the strain wearing on Elias. He barely slept, rising before dawn to work the land and staying up late poring over documents and maps. His hands shook sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. One night, she found him sitting outside in the cold, staring at the mountains. "You should be sleeping," she said, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "Can't. Keep thinking about everything we could lose." Clara sat beside him, her body heavy with the pregnancy but her resolve solid. "We've already lost things before, both of us. We survived. This is different." "How?" "Because this time I have something worth losing." Elias turned to her, his face raw with emotion. "I lived alone for years, Clara. Told myself I didn't need anything but this land and my work. Then you came and everything changed. You made this place a home, made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just survival." "Elias, if Victor takes this from us, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know who I'll be." Clara took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You'll be the same man you've always been. The man who offered me a life when no one else would. The man who taught me that strength isn't about being perfect. It's about refusing to quit." She pressed her forehead to his. "We don't need this specific piece of land to have a life together. We just need each other." "You really believe that?" "Yes. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to let Victor steal what's ours without a fight." Elias kissed her then, desperate and grateful, his hands tangling in her hair. When they finally pulled apart, something had shifted. The fear was still there, but so was determination. "We're going to win this," Clara said, "not because we're luckier or richer or better connected, but because we're willing to fight harder than he ever could." The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear, Clara dressed in her best dress, the one she'd worn when she first arrived, though it barely fit now over her belly. Elias wore the suit he'd been married in, cleaned and pressed. They looked like respectable frontier folk, and Clara hoped it would be enough. The ride to the county seat was long and uncomfortable. Clara's back ached, and the baby seemed determined to kick her ribs into submission. But she kept her discomfort hidden, her face composed. When they arrived, the courthouse was already crowded. Clara felt eyes on her immediately, curious, judging, speculating. She lifted her chin and took Elias's arm, walking into the building like she owned it. Victor was already there, of course. He stood near the front of the room in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful gentleman. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Garrison, was shuffling papers with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case. "Clara," Victor said, his voice carrying across the room. "You're looking well. Motherhood suits you." "Don't speak to my wife," Elias said quietly. "Still playing the protective husband? Admirable." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I wonder how long you'll be able to keep up the act once this charade falls apart." Clara felt Elias tense beside her. She squeezed his arm, a silent plea to stay calm. They couldn't afford to give Victor any ammunition. The judge entered, a stern-looking man named Hawthorne who'd been presiding over land disputes for 20 years. He surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious displeasure. "This is a civil matter, not a circus," he announced. "Anyone who can't conduct themselves properly will be removed. Mr. Garrison, you filed the challenge. Present your case." Garrison stood, his movements precise. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Victor Hale, has brought to light several irregularities in the land claim filed by Mr. Elias Boone. First, the original survey markers are not where the claim documents indicate they should be. Second, Mr. Boone's marriage to Miss Clara Whitlock, now Mrs. Boone, occurred under suspicious circumstances that suggest fraud. Third, there is evidence that Mr. Boone has failed to meet the improvement requirements necessary to maintain the claim." Clara's stomach dropped. The improvement requirements. They'd been so focused on the survey and the marriage that they hadn't even considered that angle. Elias's face had gone carefully blank, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. "We have a surveyor's testimony," Garrison continued, "as well as documentation showing that the marriage was performed by a now-deceased preacher with no corroborating records. Furthermore, we have statements from individuals who claim Mr. Boone's improvements to the land are insufficient and that he has not met the residency requirements." "Those are lies," Elias said, half rising. Judge Hawthorne fixed him with a stern look. "You'll have your chance to speak, Mr. Boone. Sit down." Clara pulled Elias back down, her heart racing. This was worse than they'd thought. Victor hadn't just attacked one aspect of their claim. He'd built a case designed to destroy them from every angle. Garrison called his first witness, a surveyor named Martin Cross. The man took the stand with the bored expression of someone who'd done this many times before. "Mr. Cross, you examined the Boone property?" Garrison asked. "I did." "And what did you find?" "The boundary markers don't match the original claim documents. They're off by nearly a quarter mile in some places. Either the original surveyor was incompetent or someone moved the markers after the fact. In your professional opinion, does this invalidate the claim?" "Absolutely. Land claims require accurate surveys. If the boundaries are wrong, the claim is void." Clara felt sick. But then she noticed something, the way Cross avoided looking at Elias. The slight hesitation before he answered. He was lying, or at least bending the truth, and he knew it. Elias's lawyer, a gruff older man named Porter they'd hired with borrowed money, stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Cross, how many times have you surveyed the Boone property?" "Once." "When?" 3 weeks ago." "And you're certain the markers you found were the original markers placed 5 years ago?" Cross hesitated. "They were the only markers on the property." "That wasn't my question. Are you certain those specific markers are the originals?" There's no way to verify the age of a wooden marker without... So you don't know if they're the originals or if someone placed new markers in different locations?" "Objection," Garrison said. "Speculation." "Withdrawn," Porter said. "Mr. Cross, in your survey, did you find any evidence that the markers had been recently placed or moved?" "Not conclusive evidence, no." "So it's possible someone altered the boundaries to make it appear Mr. Boone's claim was invalid?" "Objection!" Garrison was on his feet. "The witness can't testify to possibilities." Judge Hawthorne nodded. "Sustained. Move on, Mr. Porter." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Clara saw a few of the spectators exchanging glances. The hearing dragged on. Garrison called witness after witness, people Clara had never seen before, claiming Elias had barely improved the land, that he was rarely in residence, that the marriage had been sudden and suspicious. Each testimony felt like a blow. But when Porter cross-examined, cracks appeared. One witness admitted he'd only visited the property once, in winter, when improvements were naturally less visible. Another couldn't provide specific dates for his claims. A third contradicted himself so badly that even Garrison looked frustrated. Then it was their turn. Porter called Samuel Carter first. The store owner took the stand with quiet dignity. "Mr. Carter, how long have you known Elias Boone?" 5 years since he first filed his claim." "And in that time, have you observed his work on the property?" "I have. He's built a cabin, cleared fields, established a herd, improved water access. I've sold him supplies for all of it, got the receipts to prove it." "Did you witness his marriage to Clara Whitlock?" "I did. I was there the day they were married by Preacher Morrison. It was legal and proper, no question about it." Garrison's cross-examination tried to paint Samuel as biased, a friend protecting a friend. But Samuel didn't budge, his answers steady and sure. Thomas Webb came next, testifying to the boundary markers and Elias's character. Then the farming couple who'd witnessed the marriage, their testimony simple and honest. Finally, Porter called Clara. She stood, her legs shaking, and made her way to the witness stand. The room felt impossibly large, every eye on her. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. "Mrs. Boone," Porter said gently, "tell us why you came to Montana." Clara took a breath. This was the moment she'd been dreading, exposing her past, her shame, in front of all these strangers. But there was no other choice. "I came because I was told I was broken," she said quietly. "I was engaged to Mr. Hale, but when doctors determined I was unlikely to bear children, he ended our engagement. I left Philadelphia to start over, to find a place where I could be valued for more than my ability to produce heirs. And when you married Mr. Boone, did you do so fraudulently?" "No. I married him because he offered me partnership and respect, because he saw me as a person, not a commodity." Her voice grew stronger. "Our marriage was legal and real. Everything we've built together has been real." "Objection," Garrison called. "The witness is testifying to emotions, not facts." "Your Honor," Porter said, "the opposing counsel has questioned the legitimacy of this marriage. Mrs. Boone's state of mind is absolutely relevant. Judge Hawthorne considered. I'll allow it. Continue. Garrison stood for cross-examination, his expression cold. Mrs. Boone, isn't it true that you married Mr. Boone out of desperation, that you had nowhere else to go? I married him because I chose to. But you had been rejected by your former fiancé, my client, because you were unable to provide him with children. Doesn't that suggest you would do anything to secure a husband and home? Clara felt heat rise in her face. It suggests I wanted a life with someone who valued me, which I found. And yet here you are, pregnant. Quite convenient, wouldn't you say? Almost as if you knew you needed to produce an heir to secure your position. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. That's not, Clara started, but Garrison cut her off. Did you know you were pregnant when you married Mr. Boone? No. Are you certain? Yes. Because it seems rather miraculous that a woman declared barren by multiple physicians would suddenly conceive the moment she needed to secure a land claim. Objection! Porter was on his feet. Counsel is harassing the witness with baseless insinuations. Your Honor, Garrison said smoothly, I'm simply pointing out inconsistencies in the witness's testimony. The only inconsistency, Clara said, her voice cutting through the argument, is between what doctors thought they knew and what actually happened. I don't know why I was able to conceive. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe my body changed. Maybe it was never as impossible as they claimed. But this child, she placed her hand on her belly, is real. And so is my marriage. And no amount of Victor's money or manipulation will change that. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hawthorne banged his gavel, calling for order. Clara met Victor's eyes across the room and saw something she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Mrs. Boone, you may step down, the judge said. Clara returned to her seat beside Elias, her whole body trembling. He took her hand, his grip tight and warm. You did good, he whispered. Garrison called Victor to the stand. Clara watched her former fiancé take his oath, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Hale, why did you file this challenge? Garrison asked. Because I care about Clara, Victor said, his voice smooth with practiced sincerity. When I learned she'd married a stranger and moved to this harsh, isolated place, I was concerned for her welfare. The pregnancy only heightened those concerns. A woman in her condition should have access to proper medical care, not be living in primitive conditions on disputed land. So this is about her well-being? Entirely. I made a mistake letting her go, but I can't in good conscience allow her to suffer because of my error. Clara wanted to scream. The performance was perfect. Concerned former lover, trying to do right by a woman he'd wronged. Some people in the courtroom were actually nodding in sympathy. Porter stood for cross-examination, his expression skeptical. Mr. Hale, if you're so concerned for Mrs. Boone's welfare, why challenge her husband's land claim? Why not simply offer assistance? Because the claim is fraudulent. If I can prove that, perhaps Clara will see reason and return to civilization where she and her child will be safe. Safe from what exactly? From the hardships of frontier life. From a marriage that may have been entered into under false pretenses. And if Mrs. Boone has explicitly stated she wants to remain with her husband, then she's been manipulated. Anyone can see that Boone saw an opportunity, a desperate woman from a good family, pregnant and vulnerable, and took advantage. Elias started to rise, but Clara pulled him back down. They couldn't afford an outburst. Isn't it true, Porter continued, that you ended your engagement to Mrs. Boone because she was deemed unable to bear children? That's a private matter. Answer the question, Mr. Hale. Victor's jaw tightened. Yes. And now that she's pregnant, you suddenly want her back? I want her safe. Or you want to prove you were right to reject her, and that her current happiness is somehow illegitimate? Objection! Garrison was on his feet. Withdrawn, Porter said. No further questions. The hearing adjourned for the day. Clara and Elias left the courthouse in silence, both of them exhausted. They stayed in a small boarding house that night, lying side by side in a narrow bed, neither able to sleep. He's going to win, Clara whispered into the darkness. We don't know that. You saw how the judge looked at us, how people reacted to Victor's testimony. He sounds reasonable, concerned, and we just sound desperate. Elias turned to face her, his hand finding hers in the dark. "You're not desperate. You're strong. And tomorrow, we prove it." The second day of the hearing started with Garrison calling more witnesses, people who claimed to have seen Elias away from his property for extended periods, suggesting he hadn't met residency requirements. But Porter systematically dismantled their testimony, showing that most of them had only seen Elias during supply trips or while helping neighbors. Then came the final witness, and Clara's heart stopped when she saw who it was. Emily Winters, a woman from town Clara had met only once. She'd seemed kind, sympathetic even. What was she doing on Victor's witness list? Emily took the stand, her expression nervous. "Miss Winters," Garrison said, "you've had occasion to speak with Mrs. Boone." "Yes, once. A few weeks ago, in town." "And what did she tell you about her marriage?" Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking to Clara. She said she'd married Mr. Boone because she had no other options. That it was a business arrangement, not a love match." Clara's blood ran cold. She had said something like that in passing before she'd fallen in love with Elias, before everything had changed. "A business arrangement," Garrison repeated, "not a real marriage." I don't know if that's what she meant, but those were her words?" "Yes." The damage was done. Clara could feel the shift in the room, the whispers starting up again. Porter cross-examined, trying to establish context, but the words were out there now. Business arrangement. Fraud. When Emily stepped down, she mouthed, "I'm sorry," to Clara. But it was too late. Judge Hawthorne called for closing arguments. Garrison went first, painting a picture of desperate opportunism. A woman fleeing scandal. A man capitalizing on her vulnerability. A fraudulent marriage designed to circumvent land claim requirements. "The evidence is clear," Garrison concluded. "This claim is built on lies and desperation. The compassionate thing, the just thing, is to void it and allow Mrs. Boone to return to the life and care she deserves." Porter stood, his expression grim but determined. "Your Honor, this case isn't about land surveys or paperwork. It's about a man trying to control a woman who chose a different path than the one he wanted for her. Every piece of evidence we've presented shows that Elias and Clara Boone built a legitimate life together. They married legally. They've improved the land. They've earned their claim through work and perseverance. The only fraud here is Mr. Hale's attempt to rewrite history because he doesn't like the ending." Judge Hawthorne sat in silence for a long moment. "I'll render my decision tomorrow morning," he finally said. "Court is adjourned." That night, Clara couldn't eat. She sat in their boarding house room, watching snow fall outside the window, feeling the baby move inside her. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, hung in the balance. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Elias said quietly, "we'll face it together. And if we lose everything, then we start over, somewhere else. But we don't give up on each other." Clara turned to him, tears finally spilling over. "I'm scared." "So am I." He pulled her into his arms, his heart beating steady against her ear. "But I'd rather face everything ahead with you than face nothing without you." They held each other through the long night, drawing strength from the only thing Victor couldn't take away. The love they'd chosen, the bond they'd forged, the life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. Morning came too soon, cold and bright. They dressed in silence and walked to the courthouse hand in hand. The building was packed, everyone wanting to witness the judgment. Judge Hawthorne entered precisely at 9. His face revealed nothing. "I've considered all the evidence presented," he began. "This is a complex case with legitimate concerns on both sides. However, after careful review, I must render judgment based on law and fact, not emotion or speculation." Clara held her breath. Regarding the survey discrepancies, while Mr. Cross's testimony raised questions, it was not conclusive enough to prove the original claim was invalid. The contradictory witness testimony and Mr. Porter's evidence suggests the possibility of tampering, which I cannot ignore. Hope sparked in Clara's chest. "Regarding the marriage, while the circumstances may have been unusual, I find no legal basis to declare it fraudulent. The ceremony was performed by a recognized minister, witnessed and documented. Mrs. Boone's pregnancy, while remarkable, does not constitute evidence of fraud. However," the judge continued, and Clara's hope wavered, The testimony regarding residency and improvement requirements gives me pause. Mr. Boone, while you've clearly made improvements, there are gaps in the record that trouble me. Your Honor, Porter started. I'm not finished. Hawthorne held up a hand. Given these concerns, I'm ordering an independent survey of the property to be completed within 30 days. If that survey confirms Mr. Boone's original markers were accurate, and if he can provide additional documentation of residency and improvements, the claim will stand. If not, it will be voided and the land opened for new claims. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a complete loss either. Court dismissed. The gavel struck and the room erupted. Clara felt Elias's hand tighten on hers. We have 30 days, he said. 30 days to prove everything. Clara looked at him, seeing the same determination she felt. We can do this. We don't have a choice. They turned to leave and found Victor blocking their path. This isn't over, he said quietly. One way or another, Clara, you'll see I was right. No, Clara said, her voice steady and strong. What I see is a man who can't accept that I chose my own path. And that terrifies you more than anything. She walked past him without looking back, her head high, her hand locked with Elias's. They had 30 days to save their future. And Clara Boone had no intention of failing. The ride back to the homestead felt longer than the journey out. Every mile weighted with the knowledge that their 30 days had already begun ticking away. Clara watched the landscape roll past. Endless stretches of snow-covered plains giving way to pine forests. Then finally, the familiar silhouette of their mountains. Home. For now. Elias hadn't spoken much since they'd left the courthouse. His jaw was set in that way Clara had learned meant he was working through a problem, turning it over in his mind until he found a solution. She wanted to ask what he was thinking, but fatigue had settled into her bones, and the baby seemed determined to use her bladder as a punching bag. When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked their property, Clara felt something clench in her chest. The cabin looked so small from up here, so vulnerable against the vast wilderness. One building, one claim, everything they had. We need a plan, Elias said, breaking the silence. The independent surveyor will come in about 2 weeks, which gives us time to prepare. We need every document we have, supply receipts, correspondence, anything that proves continuous residency and improvement. What about the witnesses who lied? Clara asked. The ones Victor paid to say you were never here? We counter with truth. Samuel's receipts show regular purchases over 5 years. Thomas can testify to seeing me work the land. We get statements from everyone who's ever traded labor or supplies with us. He paused, his hands tightening on the reins. We also need to document every improvement. The well, the barn expansion, the irrigation channels, everything. Clara felt the weight of it pressing down. That's a lot to gather in 30 days while also maintaining the property and preparing for… She stopped, her hand going to her belly. Preparing for the baby, Elias finished quietly. I know. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the cabin, Elias helped Clara down from the horse with extra care, his hands gentle on her waist. She'd grown so much in the past month that mounting and dismounting had become small ordeals. Inside, the cabin felt cold and empty. They'd only been gone 3 days, but it felt like longer. Clara moved to start a fire while Elias tended the horses, her movements mechanical. She was adding kindling when the first cramp hit. It wasn't painful exactly, just a tightening across her abdomen that made her pause. She waited, hand pressed to her belly, until it passed. Probably nothing, just the strain of travel and stress. But an hour later, when it happened again, fear began to whisper at the edges of her mind. Elias found her sitting at the table, her face carefully composed. You all right? He asked, setting down an armful of firewood. Fine, just tired. He studied her with those 2 knowing eyes. Clara. I'm fine, she repeated more firmly this time. We have work to do. Where do we start? Over the next week, they worked like people possessed. Elias rode into town and returned with copies of every receipt Samuel could find. Thomas came by with a written statement detailing the work they'd done together over the years. Clara went through their personal correspondence, finding letters that referenced the property, the improvements, their daily life. The cramping continued, sporadic and unsettling. Clara didn't tell Elias. They had enough to worry about without adding her fears to the pile. Besides, the baby still moved regularly. That meant everything was fine. It had to be. On the 8th day, Samuel arrived with news that made Clara's blood run cold. "Victor's been busy," the store owner said, his face grim. "He's hiring men, rough types, not locals. Word is they're setting up camp about 5 miles from here." "Why?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "Intimidation, probably. Making sure you know he's watching." Samuel shook his head. "Some of us have been talking. If you need help, people to stay here with you, we can arrange it." "No," Elias said immediately. "I won't put anyone else at risk. You're not putting us anywhere. We're choosing to stand with you. And I appreciate it, but this is between me and Hale. I won't have good people caught in the middle." After Samuel left, Clara confronted Elias. "You should have accepted his offer." "And what happens if things get ugly? If Victor's men decide to cause real trouble, I won't have Samuel or Thomas or anyone else hurt because of us. So we just face whatever comes alone? We've been alone before. We survived. This is different, and you know it." Clara's voice rose, fear and frustration spilling over. "Victor isn't just fighting us in court anymore. He's trying to drive us out, scare us into leaving, and you're too proud to accept help when it's offered." "It's not about pride? Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you'd rather lose everything than admit we can't do this by ourselves." Elias's face hardened. "I've done things by myself my whole life. I don't know how to do it any other way." "Well, maybe it's time you learned." They stared at each other, the silence heavy and sharp. Then Clara turned and walked outside, needing air, needing space, needing something she couldn't name. She made it halfway to the barn before the pain hit. This wasn't a cramp. This was fire, tearing through her lower back and abdomen with such intensity that her knees buckled. She caught herself on the fence, gasping, trying to breathe through it. "Clara!" Elias was there in seconds, his hands on her shoulders. "What's wrong?" "I don't—" Another wave crashed over her, and she cried out, "Something's wrong! The baby!" He swept her up before she could protest, carrying her back to the cabin with long, urgent strides. Inside, he laid her on the bed with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the fear in his eyes. "How long has this been happening?" "Just now. But I've had cramping for days. I thought it was normal. I thought—" Her voice broke. "Elias, I can't lose this baby. I can't." "You're not going to." But she could hear the uncertainty beneath his conviction. "I'm getting the doctor." "There's no time. The nearest doctor is in town, over an hour away. Then I'll ride fast." "No!" Clara grabbed his hand, holding tight. "Don't leave me alone, please." Elias looked torn, his face a mask of helpless desperation. Then he made a decision. "I'll get Sarah Webb, Thomas's wife. She's helped with births before." He was out the door before Clara could respond, and she was left alone with her fear and the pain that kept coming in relentless waves. Time moved strangely. Clara counted the knots in the ceiling beams, focused on breathing, tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The baby hadn't moved since the pain started, and that terrified her more than anything. When Elias returned with Sarah, relief flooded through her so strongly she started crying. "Hush now," Sarah said, her voice brisk but kind. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, her hands weathered and capable. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." The examination was gentle but thorough. Clara watched Sarah's face, trying to read her expression, but the older woman gave nothing away. "Well?" Clara finally asked, unable to bear the silence. "Baby's still high up. This isn't labor, not yet. But your body's under stress, and that's causing contractions." Sarah met her eyes. "Have you been resting like you should?" "There hasn't been time. I know what you've been doing, fighting for your land, dealing with that snake from back east. But right now, none of that matters more than this baby. You understand me?" Clara nodded, tears spilling over. "You need bed rest, at least until things settle down, maybe longer. And you need to reduce stress, which I know is easier said than done given your circumstances." Sarah turned to Elias. "She stays down. No work, no worry, nothing but rest and calm. Can you manage that?" "Yes," Elias said immediately. "I mean it. I've seen stress take babies before their time. She's far enough along that the child might survive, but it won't be easy. Best chance is keeping this pregnancy going as long as possible." After Sarah left with promises to check back in a few days, Clara lay in bed feeling useless and afraid. Elias sat beside her, his hand covering hers. "I should have noticed," he said quietly. "Should have seen you were struggling. I hid it. I didn't want to add to everything else. We're supposed to be partners. That means sharing the burden, not carrying it alone." He brought her hand to his lips. "No more secrets. We tell each other when things are hard. Agreed?" "Agreed." But even as she said it, Clara felt the weight of their situation pressing down. Bed rest meant she couldn't help gather documents, couldn't work, couldn't do anything but lie here while Elias tried to save their future single-handedly. The unfairness of it made her want to scream. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended state. Clara remained in bed while Elias worked himself to exhaustion. He documented every improvement, gathered statements, prepared for the surveyor's visit. At night, he'd collapse beside her, too tired to even remove his boots. Thomas and Samuel came by regularly despite Elias's protests, helping with the heaviest work. Clara listened to their conversations from the bed, feeling like a ghost in her own life. "Survey's set for 3 days from now," Thomas said one evening. "A man named Harrison. Supposed to be honest, but who knows what Victor might offer him." "We can't control what Hale does," Elias replied. "We can only make sure our side is airtight." "And if it's not enough?" The question hung in the air. Clara held her breath, waiting for Elias's answer. "Then we cross that bridge when we come to it." After Thomas left, Clara called Elias to the bedside. "You should tell me the truth," she said quietly. "How bad is it really?" Elias sank into the chair beside the bed, his face haggard. "I don't know. We've got documentation for most improvements, but there are gaps. Times I was away helping neighbors or hunting. Times I was sick and didn't work. On paper, it might look like I wasn't meeting residency requirements. But you were here. This has been your home for 5 years. Being here and proving I was here are different things." He rubbed his eyes. "If Harrison's honest, he'll see the work and know it took years. But if Victor's gotten to him, no amount of evidence might matter." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, if Victor hadn't followed—" "Don't!" Elias's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare blame yourself. Victor's greed and pride are his own. You didn't cause this. But I'm the reason you're the reason I have something worth fighting for." Elias took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "Before you came, this was just land. A place to exist. You made it a home, made me remember what it's like to have a future worth building. Whatever happens, I don't regret that. I won't let you regret it either." Clara pulled him down into a kiss, tasting salt and desperation. When they parted, she pressed her forehead to his. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. And we're going to get through this." She wanted to believe him, but fear had settled into her bones, cold and persistent. The night before the survey, Clara woke to voices outside. She recognized Elias's rumble, but the other voice was unfamiliar. Rough. Threatening. She struggled to sit up, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see shadows in the yard. 3 men on horses, Elias standing between them and the cabin. "You should leave while you still can," one of the men said. "Mr. Hale's offering fair compensation for you to walk away. More than this dirt's worth." "Tell Hale I'm not interested." "That's a mistake. Accidents happen out here. Fires, theft, worse things." Clara's blood ran cold. She looked around wildly for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand closed on the rifle Elias kept by the bed. "You threatening me on my own land?" Elias's voice was deadly calm. "Just delivering a message. What you do with it is up to you." "Then here's my message. Get off my property before I put bullets in you." Tough talk for one man alone. Clara pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest of her body, and moved to the door. She opened it, leveling the rifle at the mounted men with hands that shook but held steady. "He's not alone," she said clearly. All eyes turned to her. Elias's face went white. "Clara, get back inside." "No." She kept the rifle pointed at the men. "You heard my husband. Get off our land." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the lead rider laughed, though it sounded forced. "A pregnant woman with a gun. Hale didn't mention you had teeth, Mrs. Boone." "There's a lot, Mr. Hale doesn't know about me. Leave. Now! The men exchanged glances. Then slowly, they turned their horses and rode off into the darkness. As soon as they were out of sight, Clara's legs gave out. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, his face furious and terrified. What were you thinking? You're supposed to be resting. And you're supposed to be safe. They were threatening you. So you decide to threaten them back while you can barely stand. What else was I supposed to do? Let them intimidate you? Let them think we're easy targets? Elias carried her back inside, his jaw tight, but when he laid her on the bed, his hands were shaking. You scared the hell out of me, he said. I scared myself. Clara's own hands were trembling now, adrenaline fading into fear. But I meant what I said. We're not alone. We're together. And together means I don't just lie here while you face danger by yourself. Even if it risks the baby? The question hit like a slap. Clara's hand went to her belly, feeling the small movements that had started up again after the cramping stopped. That's not fair, she whispered. No, it's not. But it's true. Elias sat beside her, his face in his hands. I can't lose you, Clara. Either of you. I can't. Then we have to win. We have to make sure Victor doesn't have any power over us anymore. And how do we do that when he has money and men, and we have nothing but determination? Clara thought about that, about Victor and his need to control, to win, to prove himself right, about the men he'd sent to threaten them, about everything he'd done to try to break them. He's desperate, she said slowly. Think about it. If he was confident the survey would go his way, he wouldn't need to send men to intimidate us. He wouldn't need to offer compensation to leave. He's worried. Or he's just being thorough. No, Victor doesn't do thorough. He does overwhelming. He crushes opposition so completely there's nothing left to fight back with. But he can't crush us. We keep standing back up, and that's making him reckless. Elias looked at her, something shifting in his expression. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we've been playing defense when we should be playing offense. Maybe it's time we stop reacting to what Victor does and start making him react to us. How? Clara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. The survey is tomorrow. Harrison is supposed to be honest, which means Victor will try to influence him somehow. Money, threats, something. But what if we make sure that's impossible? What if we have witnesses there? People from the community who can testify to the improvements, to your residency, to everything? We talked about this. I won't put people at risk. They're already at risk. Victor's men are camped 5 miles from here. You think they're just watching us? They're watching everyone, seeing who supports us, who doesn't. The only way anyone stays safe is if we win. Elias was quiet for a long time. Then, you're right. I've been so focused on not asking for help that I didn't see we're all in this together, whether I like it or not. So we ask. The next morning before dawn, Elias rode out. Clara spent the day in an agony of waiting, the baby pressing against her ribs, fear and hope warring in her chest. When Elias returned at midday, he wasn't alone. Samuel came first, followed by Thomas and Sarah, then the Hendersons from the next valley over, the Pratts, who ran a small ranch to the south, even old Mrs. Chen, who'd homesteaded alone for a decade and rarely left her property. They came on horses and in wagons, nearly 20 people in all. Clara watched from the window as they gathered in the yard, and tears streamed down her face. Elias came inside, his eyes bright. They're staying, all of them. When Harrison comes tomorrow, he's going to see a community. He's going to see proof that we're not just squatters trying to steal land. We're part of something bigger. Clara reached for him, pulling him down to sit beside her on the bed. Thank you. For what? For listening, for accepting help, for being willing to trust people. He kissed her forehead. You taught me that. You taught me a lot of things. That night, the cabin filled with people and noise and life. Sarah cooked a massive pot of stew. Samuel brought bread. Someone had a fiddle, and music filled the air. Clara sat propped up in bed, holding court like a queen, listening to stories and laughter and the sound of community. Thomas came to sit beside her, his weathered face kind. You know what you've done here? He asked. What? You've reminded all of us why we fight, why we stay out here in this hard land instead of going back to comfortable lives in the East. It's not just about the land. It's about building something that matters, something worth defending. He patted her hand. You and Elias, you've got that. And we're not going to let some rich man from Philadelphia take it away. Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded. Later, as people settled down for the night, some in the barn, some in wagons, some around the fire outside, Elias climbed into bed beside Clara. Nervous? She asked. Terrified. He turned to face her, his hand resting on her belly, but also hopeful. For the first time since this started, I think we might actually win. We will win, Clara said firmly, because we have to, because our daughter deserves to grow up here, in the home we built, in the community that fought for us. Daughter? Clara smiled. I'm convinced. Don't ask me why. I just know. Elias kissed her, long and slow and full of promise. Then we better make sure she has a home to come back to. They fell asleep tangled together, surrounded by friends, facing an uncertain morning, but facing it together. Harrison arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, riding a sturdy bay mare and carrying surveying equipment that looked expensive and well-maintained. He was a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense expression and eyes that missed nothing. What he didn't expect, clearly, was to find 20 people waiting for him. Mr. Harrison, Elias said, stepping forward, welcome. We're ready for the survey. Harrison looked around at the assembled crowd, his expression carefully neutral. This is irregular. I typically work alone. These are our neighbors, Clara said from where she sat in a chair Elias had brought outside for her. They're here to provide testimony about the improvements in residency if needed. I don't need testimony. I need to survey the land and verify the claim. Then survey, Thomas said. We'll wait. Harrison's mouth tightened, but he dismounted and began unloading his equipment. For the next several hours, he methodically worked his way around the property, checking markers, measuring distances, taking notes. The crowd followed at a respectful distance, watching everything. Clara noticed Harrison pause at the northern boundary, frowning. He checked his instruments twice, then made a notation. Her stomach clenched. When he finally finished, Harrison returned to where Clara sat with Elias standing protectively beside her. Well? Elias asked. The markers matched the original survey documents exactly. There's no discrepancy in the boundaries. Relief flooded through Clara so strongly she felt dizzy. As for the improvements, Harrison continued, I count a main cabin, a barn, 3 outbuildings, a well, irrigation channels, cleared fields, and maintained fencing, all of which clearly took years of consistent work to complete. So the claim is valid? Samuel pressed. Harrison looked at him, then back at Elias. Based on my survey, yes. The claim meets all requirements for improvement, and the boundaries are accurate. I'll be filing my report with the land office within the week. The crowd erupted in cheers. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as Elias pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly. It's over, he murmured into her hair. We won. But even as celebration erupted around them, Clara saw something that made her blood run cold. On the ridge overlooking their property, barely visible against the tree line, she could see riders, Victor's men, watching. And she knew with bone-deep certainty that this wasn't over. Not yet. Not until Victor admitted defeat. And men like Victor Hale never admitted defeat willingly. The riders didn't move, didn't approach. They just sat there on the ridge like vultures waiting for something to die. Clara watched them even as everyone around her celebrated, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her mother's unease. You see them? She asked Elias quietly. He nodded, his jaw tight. I see them. They're not leaving. No, they're not. Samuel approached, his face flushed with victory. This calls for a proper celebration. We should head into town. Let everyone know the good news. Not yet, Elias said, his eyes still on the ridge. Not until we know for certain what Hale's next move is. Thomas followed Elias's gaze and his expression darkened. You think he'll try something? I think a man who sends hired guns to intimidate people doesn't give up just because a survey went against him. He'll find another angle. Then we stay ready, Thomas said simply. Sarah and I can remain here for a few days. Keep extra eyes on things. Clara wanted to protest, to say they'd imposed enough, but the truth was, she felt safer with people around. The cabin that had seemed so solid and permanent now felt fragile, exposed. The celebration died down as people began to notice the watchers on the ridge. One by one, the homesteaders fell quiet, their victory souring into wariness. "Go home," Elias said finally. "All of you. You've done more than enough. Whatever comes next, it's between me and Hale." "Like hell it is," Mrs. Chen said, her voice sharp despite her age. "That man thinks he can buy his way into our valley, threaten our neighbors, and we'll just stand aside? I survived bandits, disease, and a husband who drank himself to death. I'm not scared of some Eastern dandy and his hired thugs." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest, despite her fear. These people, this community they'd become part of, they were choosing to stand together. "At least let us set up a rotation," Samuel suggested. "A few people here at all times, just in case. Hale's less likely to try something if he knows the property's never unguarded." Elias looked at Clara. She nodded. "All right," he said. "But if things get dangerous, you all clear out. Understood?" "Same goes for you," Thomas countered. "Pride's admirable, but dying for a piece of land when you've got a pregnant wife is just foolish." That night, with the Webbs sleeping in the barn and Samuel bedded down by the fire, Clara lay beside Elias and tried to quiet her racing mind. Harrison's report should have settled everything. The survey was clean, the claim validated, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something darker. "Talk to me," Elias said into the darkness. "I can hear you thinking. Victor won't accept this. You know that." "I know. So what does he do now? He can't challenge the survey. Harrison's too respected. He can't prove fraud in our marriage. What's left?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. "He could try to buy the land from us directly, offer enough money that we'd be fools to refuse. Would you take it, if he offered enough? Would you want me to?" Clara thought about that. About leaving this place, taking Victor's money, starting over somewhere else. It would be easier, safer. The baby would be born in comfort, with real doctors nearby, without the constant threat of violence hanging over them. But it would also mean Victor won. It would mean every person who'd stood with them had wasted their courage. It would mean running instead of fighting. "No," she said finally, "I wouldn't want you to. This is our home. We earned it, and I'll be damned if I let him take that away from us." Elias pulled her closer, his hand spanning her swollen belly. "Then we hold the line, whatever comes." "Whatever comes," Clara echoed. 2 days later, Harrison's official report arrived at the land office. Samuel brought the news personally, his face grave despite the positive outcome. "It's done," he said. "Harrison filed that your claim is legitimate and all requirements are met. Judge Hawthorne has 7 days to review and issue a final ruling, but it's a formality. You've won." Clara should have felt relief, joy, something. Instead, she felt only a growing sense of dread. That night, the first fire started. Clara woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. She struggled upright, her pregnant body clumsy and slow, as Elias bolted from the bed. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his rifle. "What's happening?" "The barn's on fire." He was out the door before she could respond. Clara moved to the window, her heart hammering. Orange light flickered in the darkness, and she could see figures running, hear the panicked sounds of animals. The Webbs had been sleeping in the barn. She grabbed her shawl and made for the door, ignoring every instruction about bed rest. Sarah and Thomas were out there. She couldn't just sit by and do nothing. Outside was chaos. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching into the night sky. Thomas and Samuel were trying to free the horses, while Elias and Sarah fought the fire with buckets of water that seemed pitifully inadequate against the inferno. "Clara, get back inside," Elias shouted when he saw her. "The animals! We've got them! Go!" But Clara saw something the others didn't. Movement at the tree line. Figures on horseback, watching. Not helping, not fleeing, just watching. She turned and ran back into the cabin, moving faster than she should have been able to, and grabbed the rifle. When she emerged again, she fired a shot into the air. The watching figures startled, their horses shying. Clara leveled the rifle at them. "I see you," she shouted. "I see you, and I'll remember your faces." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the riders wheeled and disappeared into the darkness. By the time the fire burned itself out, the barn was nothing but smoking timbers and ash. They'd saved the animals, barely, But the structure was gone. 5 years of work, destroyed in minutes. Sarah found Clara sitting on the ground, staring at the ruins, tears streaming down her face. "Come on, honey," the older woman said gently. "Let's get you inside. You shouldn't be out here breathing this smoke." "They did this," Clara said, her voice hollow. "Victor's men. They burned our barn." "I know. And we can't prove it. We didn't see them do it. We just saw them watching." "I know that too." Sarah helped Clara to her feet and guided her back to the cabin. Inside, she made tea and sat beside Clara while the men dealt with the aftermath outside. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" Clara asked. Sarah sighed. "Probably not. Men like Hale, they don't know when to quit. They keep pushing until they get what they want or something makes them stop." "What stops a man like that?" "Usually, getting caught doing something he can't buy his way out of, or losing so completely there's nothing left to fight for." Sarah patted Clara's hand. "But sometimes they just stop when the cost gets too high, when winning isn't worth what they'd have to do to get there." "How do we make the cost too high?" "That, I don't know, but I suspect you'll figure it out. You're a clever woman, Clara Boone, cleverer than Hale gives you credit for." When Elias finally came inside, covered in soot and smelling of smoke, his face was carved from stone. "The barn's a total loss," he said flatly. "We can rebuild, but it'll take time and money we don't have." "Did you find any evidence of arson?" "Nothing conclusive. Could have been an accident, a lantern tipped over, a spark from the fire. But we both know it wasn't." Clara stood, moving to him despite her exhaustion. "We need to go to the sheriff, report what happened." "And say what? That we think someone started a fire but we have no proof? That we saw riders watching but can't identify them? The sheriff's not going to do anything without evidence." "Then we get evidence. We watch them the way they're watching us. We document everything, and when they make a mistake, because they will, we nail them for it." Elias looked at her with something like awe. "You're not giving up." "Did you think I would?" "I thought you might be scared enough to want to leave." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "But leaving means they win, and I'm not giving Victor that satisfaction." Over the next few days, a grim routine established itself. Someone was always on watch, day and night. The men took turns patrolling the property boundaries. Clara kept a rifle within reach at all times, her pregnancy making her feel both vulnerable and fiercely protective. The hired guns kept their distance but never left entirely. Clara would see them on the ridge, or riding slowly past the property line, or camped just beyond their land. A constant reminder that Victor was still there, still waiting. Then, 5 days after the barn fire, Victor himself arrived. Clara saw the expensive horse and tailored coat from the window and felt her blood turn to ice. "He's here," she said. Elias appeared at her side, his face hard. "Stay inside." "No. If he wants to talk, he talks to both of us." They met Victor in the yard, a united front. He dismounted with practiced ease, his expression one of concerned sympathy that made Clara's skin crawl. "Clara," he said warmly, as if they were old friends, "I was devastated to hear about the fire. I hope no one was hurt." "Why are you here, Victor?" she asked coldly. "To make you an offer. A generous one." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "I'll pay you $50,000 for this property, enough to start over anywhere you want, enough to ensure your child is born in safety and comfort." $50,000. It was more money than Clara had ever imagined, enough to build a real life somewhere else without fear or danger, enough to give their daughter every advantage. "No," Elias said immediately. Victor's smile tightened. "Perhaps you should discuss this privately before—" "There's nothing to discuss. This land isn't for sale." "Mr. Boone, be reasonable. You've lost your barn. Who knows what other misfortunes might befall you? I'm offering you a way out, a chance to walk away with your pride and your money intact." "Was that a threat?" Clara asked quietly. "Of course not. I'm simply pointing out that frontier life is dangerous. Accidents happen. It would be tragic if something happened to you or your child because of stubborn pride." Elias took a step forward, his hands curled into fists. "Get off my land. Your land. For now." Victor's mask slipped, showing the cold calculation beneath. Judge Hawthorne hasn't issued his final ruling yet, and I've discovered some interesting information about Harrison's survey. It seems he may have been less than thorough in checking certain improvements. If I were to request a second, more detailed survey, you'd find the same thing Harrison found. This claim is legitimate. Perhaps, but the process would take months, and in the meantime, you'd have no legal protection if, say, someone filed a competing claim, or if your wife's health deteriorated due to the stress and isolation. Victor's eyes moved to Clara's belly. Pregnancy is so unpredictable. Anything could happen. Clara felt something snap inside her. She stepped forward, putting herself between Victor and Elias. You want this land so badly? Fine. Come take it. But know that every inch you try to steal, we'll fight for. Every lie you tell, we'll expose. Every threat you make, we'll document and report. You think you can intimidate us into leaving, but all you're doing is showing everyone exactly what kind of man you are. I'm a man who gets what he wants. You're a man who can't accept that I chose someone else, that I chose a hard life with a good man over a comfortable life with you. And that's what this is really about, isn't it? Not the land, not money. Your ego. Victor's face flushed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? You came all this way, spent all this money, hired all these men just to prove you were right to leave me. To prove I was the broken one, the defective one. But I'm not broken, Victor. I never was. You just couldn't see my worth because you were too focused on what I couldn't give you. This is absurd. What's absurd is a grown man throwing a tantrum because a woman he discarded dared to find happiness without him. Clara's voice was steady, clear, carrying across the yard. You could have moved on, found someone else, built a life. Instead, you came here to destroy mine, and that says everything about your character that needs to be said. Victor stared at her, his composure cracking. You're making a mistake. No, the mistake was ever thinking you were worth my time. Clara turned to Elias. He's done here. Make him leave. Elias stepped forward, his rifle held loosely but ready. You heard her? Go. For a moment, Clara thought Victor might actually try something. His hand moved toward his coat, and she tensed. But then he seemed to master himself. This isn't over, he said, swinging back onto his horse. Judge Hawthorne will hear about Harrison's incomplete survey, and we'll see how confident you are when you're facing another investigation. He rode off, leaving Clara and Elias standing in the yard. She was shaking, adrenaline and fear and anger all mixed together. That was incredible, Elias said quietly. That was stupid. I made him angrier. You told him the truth. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do. But Clara knew truth wasn't enough. Not against a man with Victor's resources and determination. They needed something more. They needed to outmaneuver him, not just stand against him. That night, as she lay in bed trying to quiet her racing thoughts, an idea began to form. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but it might be their only chance. Elias, she said into the darkness, what if we don't wait for Victor to make his next move? What if we make ours first? What do you mean? Victor's been able to operate in shadows, hiring men we can't identify, starting fires we can't prove, making threats that sound like warnings. But what if we brought everything into the light? What if we made this public? Elias propped himself up on one elbow. How? The newspaper in the county seat. They love a good story, and this is a great one. Wealthy Eastern industrialists trying to steal land from honest homesteaders. Harassment, intimidation, possible arson. All because his former fiancée chose someone else. They might not believe us. We don't have proof of most of it. We have the barn fire. We have witnesses to his men's threats. We have his offer of money right before he warned us about accidents. And we have me, the spurned woman who came west to start over. It's a story that sells papers, Elias, and once it's public, Victor can't operate in shadows anymore. It could backfire, make us look like we're trying to manipulate public opinion. Or it could force Judge Hawthorne to make his ruling quickly before Victor can file another challenge. Public pressure matters, especially in an election year. Elias thought about that. We'd need to be careful, make sure everything we say is true and provable. Everything we say will be true. That's our advantage. We're not the ones lying. The next morning, Clara wrote a letter to the editor of the Territorial Gazette. She kept it factual, emotional, but controlled, focusing on the timeline of events and the pattern of harassment. She included names, dates, and witness statements. By the time she finished, it was 3 pages long and devastating in its simplicity. Samuel agreed to deliver it personally, along with a request that the editor investigate before publishing. They didn't want accusations they couldn't back up. While they waited, life continued in its strange new normal. The community rotation meant there were always people around, which Clara found both comforting and exhausting. She felt like she was constantly performing, being watched, never quite able to let her guard down. The baby was getting bigger, pressing against her ribs and making sleep difficult. Sarah estimated she had about 6 weeks left, maybe less. The thought of giving birth while all this was happening terrified Clara, but she pushed the fear down, one crisis at a time. 4 days after Samuel delivered the letter, he returned with a copy of the Gazette. The story was front page, complete with a sketch of Clara and Elias standing in front of their cabin. "Homesteaders face harassment from wealthy former suitor," the headline read. The article laid out everything: Victor's broken engagement, Clara's move west, the legal challenges, the barn fire, the ongoing intimidation. It painted Victor as a vindictive man using his wealth to punish a woman for choosing her own path. "It's perfect," Clara breathed, reading it twice. They didn't sensationalize. They just reported the facts, and the facts are damning enough. "There's more," Samuel said, flipping to page 3. An editorial. The editor's calling for an investigation into harassment of homesteaders by outside interests. Says if men like Hale can use intimidation tactics without consequences, no one's claim is safe. Elias read the editorial, his expression unreadable. "This is going to make him furious." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Let him be furious. Let him see what it's like when people know the truth about him." The response was faster than they'd anticipated. By the next day, people started arriving, curious townspeople wanting to meet the couple from the article, reporters from other papers wanting their own stories, even a representative from the territorial governor's office asking questions about the barn fire and the hired guns. Victor's men disappeared from the ridge. Clara watched the empty skyline with satisfaction, but also wariness. Victor wouldn't just slink away. He'd regroup, recalculate, come at them from a different angle. She was right. 2 days later, a formal complaint was filed with the land office claiming that Clara and Elias had fabricated the entire story to gain public sympathy and pressure Judge Hawthorne's ruling. Victor's lawyer, Garrison, presented affidavits from multiple witnesses claiming that Victor had been nothing but cordial, that no harassment had occurred, and that the barn fire was clearly an accident caused by the homesteader's own negligence. "They're calling us liars," Clara said, staring at the complaint. "They're desperate," Elias corrected. "This is what you do when you're losing. You attack credibility because you can't attack facts." "But what if it works? What if people believe them?" "Then we present our witnesses. The Webbs can testify to the fire." Samuel heard the threats. Mrs. Chen saw the riders. "We have a community backing us up, and Victor has hired liars." Porter, their lawyer, agreed. "This complaint is actually good for us. It forces everything into the open. We'll have a hearing, both sides will present evidence, and the truth will come out. And truth is on your side." The hearing was scheduled for 1 week later. In the meantime, Victor's smear campaign began in earnest. Letters appeared in rival newspapers questioning Clara's character, suggesting she'd trapped Elias into marriage by claiming to be pregnant when she wasn't. Other articles implied Elias was an unstable drifter who'd never properly filed his claim. Each lie felt like a physical blow. Clara found herself defending her reputation to people she'd never met, explaining her pregnancy to strangers, proving her marriage was real to those who seemed determined to believe otherwise. "How does he do it?" she asked Elias one night, exhausted and near tears. "How does he twist everything so that we're the villains?" "Money and practice. He's been manipulating people his whole life. This is just another business transaction to him. Except it's our lives he's trading." The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. The baby was active, rolling and kicking, as if sensing her mother's distress. She got up carefully, trying not to wake Elias, and moved to the window. The moon was full, bathing the property in silver light. She could see the ruins of the barn, the fields they'd cleared, the life they'd built, all of it hanging in the balance. A hand on her shoulder made her jump. "Sorry," Elias said softly. "Didn't mean to startle you. Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. What if we lose? Then we appeal, or we start over, but we don't give up. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight. I'm not who I was when I came here. That woman who stepped off the stage was scared of everything. Her past, her future, her own shadow. Now I'm scared too, but it's different. I'm not scared of failing. I'm scared of not fighting hard enough. You fought harder than anyone I've ever known. So have you. And tomorrow, we fight one more time. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, drawing strength from the bond they'd forged. Whatever came next, they'd face it. Together. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Every seat filled, people standing in the back, reporters with their notebooks ready. Clara felt the weight of all those eyes on her, judging, speculating, deciding if she was worthy of belief. Judge Hawthorne entered, his face stern. This hearing is to address the complaint filed by Mr. Victor Hale regarding alleged fabrication of harassment claims by Mr. and Mrs. Elias Boone. Both parties will present evidence. I will then determine if the original land claim ruling should be affected by these allegations. Mr. Garrison, proceed. Garrison stood, smooth and confident. Your Honor, my client has been vilified in the press based on lies and manipulation. The Boones have painted him as a vindictive harasser, when in fact he is a concerned former acquaintance who offered help that was refused. We have multiple witnesses who will testify that no harassment occurred, that the barn fire was accidental, and that this entire narrative has been fabricated to gain public sympathy. He called his witnesses one by one. Men who swore they'd seen Elias negligently handle lanterns near the barn. A woman who claimed Clara had told her the marriage was for convenience only. A shopkeeper who said he'd overheard Elias planning to work the newspaper angle to pressure the judge. Each testimony was carefully constructed, just plausible enough to cast doubt. Clara felt her confidence eroding with every lie. Then it was their turn. Porter called Thomas first. The older man took the stand with quiet dignity and told the truth about the threats, the watching riders, the timing of the fire. Garrison tried to discredit him, suggesting he was biased as a friend, but Thomas didn't budge. Sarah came next, describing the fire and the men she'd seen on the ridge. Then Samuel, then Mrs. Chen, then others. One by one, they told their stories, simple and consistent. Finally, Porter called Clara. She made her way to the stand, her pregnant body ungainly, her heart racing. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Mrs. Boone, Porter said gently, tell us in your own words what happened when Mr. Hale came to Montana. Clara took a breath and told the story. Not the sensational version, not the dramatic retelling, just the truth, plain and raw. Victor's arrival, his proposal, his threats, the escalation, the barn fire, the constant fear. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, looking directly at Judge Hawthorne. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Garrison stood for cross-examination, his expression hard. Mrs. Boone, isn't it true that you came west because no man in Philadelphia would have you? Objection, Porter said. Relevance? It goes to credibility and motive. I'll allow it, Hawthorne said. Answer the question, Mrs. Boone. Clara met Garrison's eyes. I came west because I wanted a different life, one where I was valued for who I am, not what I could produce. But you were rejected by my client because of your condition, correct? He ended our engagement, yes. And you were bitter about that? I was hurt, but I moved on. Did you? Or did you spend months plotting revenge? Marrying quickly to make him jealous, then fabricating this entire story when he came to check on your welfare? That's not what happened. Then explain how a woman declared barren by multiple physicians suddenly becomes pregnant the moment she needs to secure a land claim. The accusation hung in the air. Clara felt every eye on her, waiting. I can't explain it, she said quietly. I don't know why the doctors were wrong. Maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe my body changed. Maybe it was never as impossible as they thought. Or maybe, she placed her hand on her belly. Maybe some things happen that we can't explain. That doesn't make them lies. Convenient? No, it's terrifying. I spent this entire pregnancy afraid I'd lose this baby because I'd been told my body couldn't sustain a pregnancy. Every day was a fight against fear and doubt. That's not convenient, that's agony. Her voice cracked, and she saw something shift in the courtroom. People leaning forward, expressions softening. Even Hawthorne looked moved. Garrison tried a few more questions, but the damage was done. Clara's raw honesty had cut through his carefully constructed doubts. When she stepped down, Elias was there to help her, his hand steady on her elbow. She saw pride in his eyes, and love, and fierce protectiveness. The hearing concluded with closing arguments. Garrison painted the Boones as opportunistic liars. Porter painted Victor as a powerful man abusing his position. Both made compelling cases. Judge Hawthorne sat in silence for a long moment after the arguments concluded. "I've heard enough," he finally said. "I'll issue my ruling within 48 hours. Until then, this matter stands in adjournment." The gavel struck, and Clara felt her knees weaken. 48 more hours of uncertainty. 48 more hours of fear. But she'd told the truth. They all had. And now it was up to Hawthorne to decide if truth was enough. The 48 hours stretched like years. Clara spent them in a fog of waiting, her body heavy with pregnancy and exhaustion, her mind unable to settle. She sat by the window watching the road, watching for riders that didn't come, watching for answers that remained stubbornly out of reach. Elias worked himself to the point of collapse, throwing himself into rebuilding the barn's foundation as if physical labor could somehow influence Hawthorne's decision. Clara watched him from inside, seeing the fear he wouldn't voice, the desperation he channeled into swinging a hammer and hauling timber. On the second night, Sarah came to sit with her while the men worked outside. "You should eat something," the older woman said, setting down a plate of stew. "I'm not hungry." "The baby is? Eat." Clara picked up the spoon mechanically, forcing down bites that tasted like ash. Through the window, she could see Elias and Thomas working by lantern light, their breath misting in the cold air. "What if Hawthorne rules against us?" Clara asked quietly. "Then you appeal. You fight. You don't give up." "I'm tired of fighting." Sarah's hand covered hers, warm and weathered. "I know, honey, but that's when it matters most, when you're tired and scared and every part of you wants to quit. That's when you find out what you're really made of." "What if I'm not made of enough?" "You carried yourself across a continent to start over. You've survived a Montana winter, learned to run a homestead, stood up to men with guns, and you're about to bring a life into this world. You're made of more than enough." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I just want this to be over. I want to know my daughter will have a home, that she'll be safe." "She will be. One way or another, you'll make sure of that." The next morning, word came that Judge Hawthorne had issued his ruling and requested both parties present themselves at the courthouse by noon. Clara dressed carefully, her best dress straining across her belly, her hands shaking as she tried to pin her hair. "Here," Elias said, taking over. His hands were gentle as he worked, and when he finished, he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. We haven't won yet. Doesn't matter. You stood up for us, for our home, for our family. That's everything." The ride to town felt surreal. Spring had finally broken through winter's grip, and the air smelled of wet earth and new growth. Clara tried to take it as a sign, but superstition felt hollow when so much hung in the balance. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Clara saw Victor standing with Garrison, his expression carefully neutral. But she caught the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was nervous too. Judge Hawthorne entered precisely at noon carrying a thick folder of documents. He surveyed the packed courtroom with his usual stern expression before taking his seat. "I'm going to make this brief," he began. "I've reviewed all testimony, examined all evidence, and consulted the relevant territorial statutes regarding land claims and harassment. This case has raised serious questions about both the legitimacy of the Boone claim and the conduct of all parties involved." Clara's hand found Elias's, gripping tight. Regarding the land claim itself, the independent survey conducted by Mr. Harrison was thorough and professional. His findings clearly show that the original boundary markers are accurate and that the improvements meet all requirements for a valid homestead claim. No evidence has been presented that successfully refutes these findings. Relief flooded through Clara, but Hawthorne wasn't finished. However, the allegations of harassment and intimidation are another matter. These are serious charges that, if true, represent a violation of territorial law and basic human decency. If false, They represent a malicious attempt to manipulate public opinion and this court. The judge's eyes moved between Clara and Victor. I've considered the testimony carefully. On one side, we have multiple witnesses from the community, people with established reputations and no apparent motive to lie, testifying to threats, intimidation, and suspicious circumstances surrounding a fire. On the other side, we have witnesses whose connection to Mr. Hale raises questions about their objectivity. Garrison started to stand, but Hawthorne held up a hand. I'm not finished. What convinced me, ultimately, was not the quantity of witnesses, but their quality and consistency. The Boone's witnesses told the same story from different perspectives, with details that matched and timelines that aligned. Mr. Hale's witnesses had inconsistencies, contradictions, and in at least 2 cases testimony that directly conflicted with documented facts. Victor's face had gone pale. Furthermore, Hawthorne continued, I received an interesting communication yesterday from the Territorial Marshal's office. It seems they've been investigating reports of hired intimidation in several counties, and Mr. Hale's name has appeared in connection with similar tactics used against other homesteaders who refused to sell their claims. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Garrison shot to his feet. Your Honor, that information is not part of this case. It's part of my decision-making process, Counselor. Sit down. Garrison sat, his face flushed. Based on all of this, Hawthorne said, I am ruling as follows. The Boone land claim is legitimate and valid. All challenges are dismissed, and the claim is hereby confirmed with full legal standing. Additionally, I'm referring the matter of harassment and intimidation to the Territorial Marshal for criminal investigation. If evidence of arson or conspiracy is found, appropriate charges will be filed. The gavel struck, and the courtroom exploded. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. They'd won. Not just the land, but everything. Validation, justice, protection, everything. Elias pulled her into his arms, and she felt his whole body shaking. It's over, he whispered into her hair. It's finally over. People crowded around them, Thomas pumping Elias's hand, Sarah hugging Clara carefully around her belly, Samuel grinning like he'd won the claim himself. The celebration swelled around them, joyful and chaotic. Through the crowd, Clara saw Victor. He stood alone near the back of the courtroom, Garrison speaking urgently at his elbow. For a moment their eyes met. Clara expected to see rage, or hatred, or the cold calculation she'd become so familiar with. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like defeat, not just in the case, but in himself. As if he'd finally realized the cost of his obsession and found it wasn't worth paying anymore. She turned away. He didn't deserve her attention, her anger, or her pity. He was simply irrelevant now. Outside, the celebration continued. Someone had brought whiskey and toasts were being made. Clara accepted congratulations from people she'd never met, townspeople who'd followed the case in the papers and come to see justice done. Porter found them in the crowd, his weathered face split in a rare smile. Congratulations, you earned this. Thank you, Elias said, shaking his hand. For everything. Just doing my job. Though I'll admit, this one felt personal. I don't like bullies. He glanced back at the courthouse. Word of advice. Halo's not going to be prosecuted unless the marshal finds solid evidence, but the investigation will keep him busy and nervous for a while. I'd use that time to shore up your defenses, just in case. You think he'll try something else? I think a man who came this far won't give up easy, ruling or not. Be careful. The warning dampened Clara's mood slightly, but she refused to let fear steal this moment. They'd won. For now, that was enough. The ride home was quiet, both of them too emotionally exhausted for conversation. When they finally crested the ridge and saw their property spread out below, Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was theirs. Legally, officially, undeniably theirs. That night they sat by the fire in comfortable silence. Elias had his arm around her, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby move. What do you want to name her? He asked suddenly. Clara smiled. You're convinced it's a girl too? I trust your instincts. So what should we call her? Clara thought about that. About the journey that had brought them here, the strength she'd found, the community that had stood with them. Hope, she said finally. I want to name her Hope, because that's what this place gave me when I'd lost it. Elias kissed her forehead. Hope Boone. I like it. They fell asleep there by the fire, wrapped in each other, and the knowledge that they'd built something that couldn't be taken away. 3 days later, Clara woke to cramping that felt different from before. Sharper, more insistent. She lay still for a moment, counting, timing, before shaking Elias awake. "It's time," she said quietly. He was instantly alert. "The baby?" "The baby." What followed was organized chaos. Elias rode for Sarah while Clara tried to stay calm, breathing through contractions that were coming faster than she'd expected. By the time Sarah arrived with her birthing supplies and calm competence, Clara was certain this baby had inherited her mother's impatience. "First babies usually take their time," Sarah said, examining her. "But this one seems eager to meet you. How are you handling the pain?" "I've handled worse," Clara managed, though that was becoming less true with each contraction. Labor progressed faster than anyone expected. By evening, Clara was exhausted and terrified and convinced her body was being torn apart. Sarah kept up a steady stream of encouragement while Elias held Clara's hand and looked like he might pass out. "I can see the head," Sarah announced. "One more push, Clara. Just one more." Clara bore down with everything she had, screaming through the effort, and then suddenly there was release and the sharp, indignant cry of a newborn. "A girl," Sarah said, her voice warm with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Clara collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Sarah cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft blankets. When the older woman placed the tiny bundle in Clara's arms, the world seemed to stop. She was perfect, impossibly small, with a thatch of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything. Her little fist waved in the air, and when Clara offered her finger, the baby gripped it with surprising strength. "Hope," Clara whispered. "Hello, Hope." Elias sat beside them, his face full of wonder. When he reached out tentatively, Clara guided his hand to rest on their daughter's tiny chest, feeling the flutter of her heartbeat. "We made this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Against everything, we made this." "We did." Sarah gave them privacy after ensuring both mother and baby were stable. Clara lay there watching Hope sleep, marveling at every tiny feature, unable to believe something so perfect had come from her supposedly broken body. "The doctors were wrong," she said to Elias, "about everything. I'm not defective. I'm not broken. I was just waiting for the right time, the right place, the right person." "You were always whole," Elias replied. "They just couldn't see it." Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Hope proved to be a demanding but healthy baby, keeping Clara busy with feedings and changings and the 1,000 small tasks of early motherhood. The community rallied around them, Sarah teaching Clara how to nurse, neighbors bringing food and supplies, Thomas helping Elias finish rebuilding the barn. The marshal's investigation into Victor continued, though slowly. Witnesses were interviewed, the barn fire examined, Victor's hired men tracked down and questioned. Clara followed the news with detached interest, too absorbed in her daughter to care much about Victor's fate. Then, 6 weeks after Hope's birth, Samuel brought news that made Clara's blood run cold. "Fire at Victor's hotel," he said, his face grim. 3 nights ago. He barely escaped. 2 of his men weren't so lucky. Clara felt a chill despite the warm spring air. Was it? Accident, supposedly, but the timing's suspicious. Marshall thinks maybe Victor's men got sloppy, or maybe someone decided to send him a message about playing with fire. Is he still here, in Montana? That's the thing. Nobody's seen him since the fire. His lawyer says he returned east, but there's no record of him on any stage or train. Some folks are saying he just disappeared into the wilderness. Clara looked down at Hope sleeping in her arms, peaceful and oblivious. Part of her wanted to feel sorry for Victor, but mostly she just felt tired. Tired of his obsession, his manipulation, his refusal to let go. "I hope he's gone," she said quietly. "I hope he finally found something more important than revenge." Samuel nodded. For what it's worth, the marshal's closing the investigation. Without Victor to press charges against, and without solid evidence of arson at your place, there's nothing to prosecute. You're clear. After he left, Clara sat on the porch with Hope, watching Elias work in the distant field. The barn was nearly finished, and they'd already started planning expansions. A proper root cellar, a chicken coop, maybe even a second room for when Hope got older. The future stretched before them, no longer shadowed by threats or legal battles. Just the hard, honest work of building a life. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Clara nursing Hope while Elias mended a harness, she felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, noticing her expression. "That I almost let fear stop me from having this. When I was in Philadelphia, after Victor left, I thought my life was over, that I'd failed at the only thing society told me mattered. I nearly didn't come west because I thought, what's the point? What kind of life could I possibly build? And now? Now I know I was asking the wrong question. It's not about what kind of life I could build. It's about what kind of person I wanted to be. And I like who I've become." Elias set down the harness and moved to sit beside her, careful not to jostle Hope. "You've become extraordinary. I've become myself, maybe for the first time." She looked at him, this man who'd offered her partnership and given her everything. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing I was strong before I believed it. For giving me space to grow into someone worth being. Clara, you were always worth being. You just needed the right place to bloom." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep, listening to the fire crackle. Outside, spring had fully arrived, painting the valley in shades of green and gold. Summer came fast and fierce, bringing long days of backbreaking work and short nights of exhausted sleep. Hope grew rapidly, her personality emerging, curious, determined, with a temper that suggested she'd inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength. The homestead flourished. With the barn rebuilt and crops planted, they were better positioned than they'd ever been. Neighbors stopped by regularly, and Clara realized they'd become part of the valley's fabric, woven into the community through shared labor and mutual support. One evening in late July, as Clara sat on the porch with Hope on her lap, she saw a rider approaching. Her hand instinctively moved toward the rifle they still kept close, old habits dying hard. But as the figure drew closer, she relaxed. It was just a messenger from town, carrying what looked like official papers. Elias emerged from the barn as the messenger dismounted. "Mr. Boone? Mrs. Boone? I have documents from the Territorial Land Office." Clara's stomach clenched. Even now, official communications made her nervous. Elias took the papers, unfolding them carefully. Clara watched his face, trying to read his expression. "What is it?" she asked when the silence stretched too long. "It's the deed. The final, official deed to the property." He looked up at her, his eyes bright. "We're landowners, Clara. Legally, permanently. This is ours." The messenger tipped his hat. "Congratulations. You fought hard for it." After he left, Elias brought the deed to Clara. She read it carefully, seeing their names in official print, seeing the boundaries described in legal language, seeing the seal that made it all real and permanent. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it," Elias confirmed. That night, they celebrated quietly, just the three of them, sharing a meal by lamplight, while Hope babbled and grabbed at everything within reach. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was perfect. Autumn arrived with its usual Montana swiftness, frost painting the mornings white and the trees turning to flame. Clara stood at the window one October morning, Hope balanced on her hip, watching Elias bring in the last of the harvest. "That's your papa," she told Hope, who was now sitting up and showing signs she'd be crawling soon. "See how hard he works? That's because he's building something for you, a legacy, a home, a place where you'll always belong." Hope gurgled and grabbed Clara's hair, and Clara laughed, gently extracting the tiny fist. A knock at the door made her turn. Thomas stood there, his face unusually serious. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I thought you should know. Word from town is that Victor Hale's body was found about 50 miles north of here. Exposure and injury, looks like. He'd been wandering in the wilderness for weeks, maybe months." Clara felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and something like pity. How did he end up out there? Best guess is he left after the hotel fire and got lost or injured. Tried to make it somewhere and didn't. The wilderness doesn't care how much money you have or how important you think you are. "No," Clara said quietly. "It doesn't." After Thomas left, she told Elias, They stood together in silence, processing the news. I should feel something, Clara said, but I just feel empty, like it's too late for any emotion to matter. He made his choices. They led him where they led him. I didn't want him dead. I just wanted him gone. I know, but maybe that's the same thing for men like Victor. Maybe the only way he could truly let go was to let go of everything. Clara looked down at Hope, who was trying to grab at dust motes in the lamplight. This child, this impossible miracle, would grow up never knowing the man who'd tried so hard to destroy her parents' happiness. She'd grow up knowing only love, community, and the strength of people who chose to stand together. Should we tell her about him someday? Clara asked. About everything that happened? Maybe. When she's old enough to understand that sometimes the hardest battles aren't against the land or the weather, but against people who can't accept that they don't control everything. And that the real victory isn't in beating them, but in building something they can't touch. Winter came again, but this time Clara faced it without fear. The cabin was warm, the supplies were ample, and her family was healthy. When the first big storm hit, she sat by the fire with Hope on a blanket beside her, watching Elias carve a small wooden horse for their daughter. Tell me again, she said suddenly. Tell you what? The day I arrived. What you thought when you first saw me step off that stage. Elias smiled, setting down his carving. I thought you looked terrified and determined, like you were walking towards something that scared you but doing it anyway. I was. I thought you might reject me. Send me back. I almost did. Not because of you, but because I didn't know if I could be what you needed. And now? Now I know that what we needed was each other. Not some perfect version of ourselves, but exactly who we were. Broken pieces that fit together to make something whole. Clara blinked back tears. I love our life. So do I. Hope chose that moment to let out an imperious shriek, demanding attention. They both laughed, and Elias scooped her up, tossing her gently in the air while she squealed with delight. Clara watched them, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd traveled 1,000 miles to find. Not just a home or a husband, but herself. The woman she'd always been underneath the fear and doubt and societal expectations. The woman who could face down hired guns and legal battles and prejudice and come out stronger. The woman who'd learned that being chosen wasn't nearly as important as choosing yourself. Spring came again, as it always did, melting the snow and coaxing green from the frozen ground. Hope took her first steps on a warm April morning, stumbling from Elias to Clara and back again, her face alight with triumph. Look at you, Clara said, catching her daughter as she tumbled into her arms. Look at how strong you are. And Hope was strong. Strong in the way children raised in love and security are strong, confident, curious, unafraid. She explored everything, climbed where she shouldn't, and approached life with the same determination her mother had shown stepping off that stage 3 years ago. One evening in late May, Clara and Elias sat on the porch watching Hope chase fireflies in the twilight. The barn stood solid and complete. The fields were planted. The deed hung framed inside the cabin, a reminder of everything they'd fought for. Do you ever miss Philadelphia? Elias asked suddenly. Clara thought about that, about the life she'd left behind, the comfort, the security, the certainty. Then she thought about what she'd gained, purpose, strength, partnership, love. No, she said honestly. Not even for a moment. That life was about being what other people needed me to be. This life is about being myself. Even with all the hardship, the cold and the work and the danger, especially because of that, easy lives make soft people. I was soft once, breakable. But this land, this life, you made me unbreakable. Elias took her hand, his thumb brushing over the calluses that marked her as a frontier woman. You were always unbreakable. You just needed the right test to prove it. Hope ran up to them then, her hands cupped around something. Mama, look! Clara bent down to see the firefly glowing in her daughter's small palms. Beautiful, sweetheart. But we have to let it go. Everything wild needs to be free. Hope opened her hands, and the firefly lifted into the darkening sky, its light blinking as it rose. She watched it with wide eyes, then turned and ran back to chase more. She's going to be a handful, Elias said. She's going to be extraordinary, Clara corrected. She's going to grow up knowing she can be anything, do anything, choose any life she wants. And when the world tells her she can't, she'll know better, because she'll have us to show her different. They sat there as darkness fell completely, watching their daughter play, listening to the sounds of the valley settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not a threat, just a reminder that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, Clara would tell her the story. Not a fairy tale with villains and heroes, but the truth. About a woman who was told she was broken, who believed it until she found a place wild enough to match her spirit. About a man who offered partnership and found love. About a community that stood together against greed and intimidation. But most importantly, about choosing yourself when the world tries to choose for you. About finding strength in the hardest places. About building a life worth fighting for, one choice at a time. For now, though, Clara simply sat with her husband and watched their daughter dance with fireflies and let herself feel the peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The Montana wilderness had tested her. She had not just survived it, she had become part of it, and in doing so, she had discovered the truth that had been there all along. She was never unwanted, never broken, never less than. She simply hadn't found a place strong enough to hold her. Now she had. And nothing, not doubt, not fear, not any man's judgment, could ever take that away. The stars came out one by one, painting the sky with light. Clara breathed in the cool mountain air, felt the solid warmth of Elias beside her, heard Hope's laughter floating on the breeze. This was home. This was family. This was everything, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything she'd never known she needed, everything she'd traveled so far to find, everything she'd fought so hard to keep. Clara Boone sat on her porch, surrounded by the life she'd built with her own two hands, and smiled. She had arrived in Montana as a woman no one chose. She had become a woman who chose herself. And that made all the difference.